Yes, go.
So I already cleared the room. Well, so anyway, I'm Mark Ingalls. I'm the treasurer here. I see a lot of familiar faces, maybe one or two new ones. So some of you guys have seen this presentation before. I have switched it up a bit, so it won't be the same as before. I do really want to quickly, again, shout out the food service department for all the great work they do. Just to give you an idea of the type of service they're providing. Last year they served over 229,500 meals in each of our 5 buildings. And as of today, they're up at 209,291 with a whole month ago. So they are definitely on pace to eclipse that number. They are one of the hardest working folks in our building, so we want to appreciate them.
I forgot to say when they were here, they even serve hot lunches when we don't have electric.
Yes, they do.
I mean, come on. They're killing it.
So, I just want to get this out of the way. I know we talked about the bond issue earlier today, earlier in the meeting, but bonds are not part of this forecast. We cannot use any bond proceeds for operating. The 5-year forecast just deals with operating dollars. So when I say operating dollars, that means the money that's used to pay our bills, to pay our teachers, to pay our staff, to pay our lunch ladies. It does not include debt payments or construction costs or anything like that. That's considered separate, so I'm not going to be touching on the last week's results in this presentation. Just want to get that out of the way. For those of you who are new, the 5-year forecast serves several purposes. The most important being to gauge the Board of Education on our financial picture and where we're headed. It also serves as a basis to allow me to sign contracts with our teachers, with our classified staff, with our vendors, to provide services to our students. Basically, if the forecast shows that we can't afford the contract, I can't sign it, or I get fined, and I don't want that. It also provides a method for the Ohio Department of Education and the Auditor of State to keep an eye on school districts so they can intervene when they need to and hopefully catch problems early so it doesn't balloon into a fiscal emergency situation. So I'm going to talk about 2 key line items, the revenue and the expenditures. Just right off the bat, I'm going to be focusing a lot on the revenue side in this presentation for reasons that will be apparent soon. Talking about the local and state funding side, and when they get into the expenditures, about our personnel and purchase services. So I just want to make clear that I'm by law required to forecast out 5 years. The TV weather guy only has to do 10 days. And so when you get further out of the forecast, the fuzzier it gets. So it doesn't discredit, our attempts to forecast out to 5 years, but just keep in mind that there's a lot of significant events that can happen between now and 2029, which would have a major impact on this forecast. When those come to our attention, we will file an amended forecast. We have to do this twice a year to make sure that we capture the most current data as is available. This year, however, is the fuzziest, unclearest picture we've ever had. There's a lot of reasons for this at the state level that can impact our state revenues and our local revenues. So when I'm putting together this forecast for the board to approve, and again, this is the board's forecast, using the data that we have today. So the laws are in place today. I'm not taking into account the laws that are being discussed at the State House that could impact our state or local funding. I can only use what I know today. As the state budget becomes clearer and we know what's going to be in it, then we'll start making adjustments to our forecast as appropriate. So get into our revenues. We've been pretty consistent, local and state split, about 2/3 local, 1/3 state. Definitely projecting that to continue going forward as things stand today. However, that could easily change by the end of June when we get the final state budget. This is our reaction when we saw the governor's proposal, and especially when we saw what the House decided to do with it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get into the details of what's being proposed. Again, I cannot model what they may do, but just so you know, this is why there's a lot of uncertainty in this forecast today. I really don't like text slides with a lot of text, but So the governor's budget, it called for $103 million less expenditures for public schools. So that would have resulted in about a $400,000 cut to Jonathan Alder under the governor's proposal. The main reason for that is because we're on what's known as a funding guarantee, and the governor proposed eliminating those guarantees. Those guarantees are there for schools with declining enrollment, so they cannot fall below a certain level of state funding. However, for us, we have increased enrollment. The reason why we're in that guarantee is that as our local wealth has gone up, we're expected to pick up more of the share. So our share of the formula put us below that floor and that guarantee. And because of that, we would have going to lose state funding under this proposal. Wrote some testimony for our state legislators, and they decided to take that out of the House version to actually increase our funding by 0.78% or $66,000, which is great. However, the House version does away with the formula altogether. So there is no state formula to calculate state aid. They actually put it in language where it prohibits the use of the formula to calculate aid for school districts. They also limit our carryover cash balances to 30% of prior fiscal year's expenditures. I'm going to spend a lot of time on that one. And basically disrupt our entire local source of revenue. So we are currently here. The governor submitted his budget. The House passed their version on April 9th. We're currently here. The Senate is considering this version of the budget, but we have to file a 5-year forecast by May 31st. We're not going to know what the Senate wants to do until early June. We're not going to know what the final version is going to look like till closer to June 30th. The governor may not even sign until the first week of July. So that's why it's messy. There's a lot of moving parts here. A lot could change. The Senate could do a completely different thing than what the House wants to do. What they'll do is they'll pass their version of the budget, send it back to the House. The House will vote against it. They get together in a conference committee, hash out differences, and go from there. So the primary sponsors are Brian Stewart, House Finance Chair, and Speaker Huffman. Brian Stewart is our local rep here in Madison County. So these are the two reps that are really responsible for the current state budget. I'm forecasting state revenue to remain flat. So this is where we currently are. This is where the governor's proposal would have had us, so a decline there. The House version gets us a little bit above where we were, not by a heck of a lot. I think it's safe to just assume flat revenues in that source. But then we get to the property tax reform part of the budget. And I do want to say that, there's a reason why the House is including property tax reform in their version of the budget. I'm not going to sit here and say there's not a problem and there's no reason for it. It just came out of the blue. Property values have increased substantially over the last several years. There's a lot of reasons for that. Part of it's due to COVID supply chain issues, the cost of construction, inflation, and also the fact that with low interest rates in response to the COVID pandemic, people were able to afford more houses than they otherwise would have. So that jacks up obviously the sales ratios as being used to help value property. So there's a lot of factors here beyond our control. So that's why the House is trying to do something. Last year, they had a whole committee to study the issue. They released a report at the end of December, which didn't say a lot of anything. It basically said there's an issue. Here's a couple ideas, but there was no firm recommendation, which is why the House is currently trying to have some kind of legislation to address this issue. We are on what's known as a 20 mil floor for operating levies. So this is a blue bar here. If you notice throughout the whole time period, even though our values have gone up, that bar has stayed the same. That's because we're at the lowest legal limit for taxes in the state. 50 years ago, when the state put together its current property tax system, they put in a measure that would reduce tax rates due to property values going up due to inflation. However, they did put a floor on it, so school districts are not reduced down to zero. So that's why we're where we are. So because of that, we have seen increased revenues due to these property values, but that's all in service of teaching our kids, keeping the lights on, getting them here safely. The presentation we saw with the freshmen with the career fair, we're using it, for the best purposes.
Mark, could you go back to that previous slide
Yeah.
and explain, like in 2013, we're above the 20 mil floor, we're higher there than we are right now. Did you run through that, the red?
Oh, this is the bond.
Okay.
This is the bond
Yep.
levy. So basically everything, so this is the bond, this is our permanent improvement. So this shows our effective rates, and the bond and the permanent improvement levies, these all decrease as the values go.
Yeah. So this is the point I was making earlier. that-
Yeah,
that
exactly.
The effective millage people pay goes down
Mhm.
as the district grows.
Yeah, so for the bond, this started out at 8.9 mils, and now we're down, this is an old graph, we're down to 1.5 now. So I just want to show that, there is a correlation there, but the issue with how the House is proposing to go about this property tax reform, though, is, well, there's a lot of reasons that it's not the right plan. For one is they introduced this thing on April 1st, they passed it April 9th. So they're trying to redo 50 years of tax law without hearings, without any consideration, and trying to do it within a week. One of the issues is they're looking at our cash balances as of June 30th of each year. This graph is in all of our board packets, they're all available online. Our lowest month for cash is not June 30th. We're looking at January, February as our lowest cash balance months, which means that
Why?
because we get our property tax revenue here in August, we get it here in in February, March, and then we spend it down. So what happens is, we get an influx of cash, so we have a surplus in those months, then we start deficit spending it down to do our payroll, to do our utilities, buy supplies. So when we get down here, there's about a $4 million difference between our lowest cash month and our highest.
Is that pretty typical among school districts?
It is. And
So the month to pick should not be June.
it should not be June, no.
Okay.
We call this the bat wing because, it goes up and then dips down, goes back up again. So,
So explain to me, Mark, I pay my mortgage every month,
yes.
and as part of my mortgage, I pay my property taxes every month.
Mhm.
Why aren't you getting paid every month?
Because the state distributes twice a year.
I understand that. I actually pay every 6 months, but you see my point.
I did.
Yeah. So
Yes.
that people understand, we have to start communicating this to people, and why, does that make sense?
It does. So, I pay my property tax as an escrow, so that's part of my monthly payment in the house. So what they do is they put money aside into that pot, and then the tax bill comes twice a year. They pay it out of that pot, and then we build it back up.
The mortgage company does.
The mortgage company does, yep. So some people, they don't do that, they just pay their tax bill when it comes. But either way, the tax bill comes twice a year, and the revenues come twice a year. So that's why it just doesn't make sense. So looking at just June. And then if you're looking at just June as well, it's ignoring the fact that we have encumbrances each fiscal year, which are bills that we incurred, obligations we incurred in one fiscal year that we haven't paid yet. So these will be paid out the following fiscal year. We also have accrued wages and benefits for our staff. So our teachers, they work August through May, but they get paid throughout the whole summer, for months when they're not working. So what happens is we have to still pay that out. They earned it, they owe it, we owe it, but that's not being taken into account either
Why are we paying them when they're not here?
for a steady income.
But
Yes.
they
gets divided
choose to take their salary for 9 months and stretch it
Over 12.
over
Yep.
12. So they reduce what they would get paid
Mhm.
during their normal working months so that they have a steady income.
Yeah. Every
Okay.
year we have.
So we don't actually pay them when they're not here.
Right.
Okay.
So every September when the first paychecks hit, we have to explain to every new employee how to read their paycheck, because they see how much money they earned, and then there's a little deduction for accrual. Then that accrual is get put aside so they can get paid in the summer months. And so that's how that works. And also, they also do benefits. I mean, retirements gets paid out each time there's a payroll. Health insurance does not stop in May. You know, our teachers are also covered in June, July, and August. So that's all money that is being set aside that is not being taken into account by the House. So our true cash balance is somewhere between $2.5 to $3 million less than what they're basing this off of. And it's, again, not well thought out. If they've had chances for hearings and testimony, they could hear this from people who live it. When I talked to Representative Richardson last Friday, she had no idea about this. It was news to her for a bill that she voted for.
And what efforts have you made? I mean, you don't have to go into detail on everything, but what efforts have you made to try to educate our legislature?
Yeah, I've submitted written testimony to the House. I have a meeting set up for next week with Senator Reynolds. We also met with her at Tolles a couple months ago, back when it was just the governor's version of the budget, and so before this budget came out. And Dr. Miller and I also met with Representative David Thomas from Ashtabula County. He was at Tolles. He's spearheading a lot of the efforts at the state level, or at the House level, to do property tax reform. So we've had those conversations. Basically what it comes down to is Speaker Huffman, this was his baby. He wants to do something. He introduced to his caucus, this is what we're voting on, and that's what they did. And now we're trying to catch up. So modeling the impact of that proposal, because the remedy is if we had too much cash, if we had a higher, over 30% of the cash balance, our property tax revenues would have to be reduced the following year to get us underneath that cap. So that is about $5.4 million in less revenue for next year. And that'll basically get us in a fiscal distress situation by fiscal year 28. Because once we have that big dip, we're not going to be able to cash back up. And then our expenditures are going to continue to increase because of the agreements we signed with our teachers, because of inflation, and just the cost of doing business. Because we still have to have school, we still have to get kids to school, we have to keep the buildings operating. So overall it's a disaster. So I just want to point, so anyway, that's why it's just fuzzy, because everything I'm presenting to the board in this forecast, it could change depending on what the state decides to do. Any other questions on that? So there's a lot of advocacy. I encourage everyone out here, if you are so inclined, to also reach out to your legislators, and feel free to ask me questions as well. Again, I don't want us to come in and say that nothing should be done about property taxes, but do it in a way that's sustainable, that helps our taxpayers, keeps schools whole in some way, because we still have to operate, but also not lead to situations where, if something like this passes, let's say 1 year we're over that cap, so the next year your tax bill goes down because they got to reduce our property tax revenues. We get underneath that cap the next year, well, guess what? Your tax bills are going to go back up because we're underneath that cap. So we're not reduced anymore. So it'd be very hard for our taxpayers to plan for vacations, for home repairs. They don't know what their tax bills are going to be. So anyway, I can go on for a while there. General fund operating expenditures, pretty steady. This is where we're looking at. We are budgeting for additional staff for enrollment growth. We've had several enrollment studies done. So for every 25 additional students, we're adding a staff member, budgeting for a staff member, I should say. We also have our new collective bargaining agreements in place, effective this fall, which will be a 4% base increase for salaries, followed by a 3 and a 3. And we also have things like a curriculum adoption, which is on your agenda. That does cost money. So that's all being accounted for here. So, overall, we do try to keep our expenditures as close to our revenues as possible. We don't want to be in a situation where, we're just sitting on cash. We want to make sure we're investing the revenues that we have brought in. We do have income tax that is due to expire December 2026. So keep that on our radar. And that's about it.
Mark, could you go back to the revenue pie chart real quick? Yeah.
Oh,
No, the one
expenses.
The
that,
general fund
the
pie
general
chart.
fund.
Yeah.
Yeah, the pie chart. The
One
pie,
forward one.
go forward one, yeah.
It's me stuck.
So really, it's about, would you say 75% of
Mhm.
our revenue goes to staff?
It does.
So what percentage of staff live in our district? Because if there's a lot, that's why you're reinvesting right in our community.
That's a good point. It is 58%.
58% of
Yes.
our staff live in our district.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess it's going up a little bit with Mr. Lester as well.
Oh, it's
But yes, 58% and of our staff live within the district. So they're paying into our property tax base, our income tax base. If they live in Plain City or they work at Plain City Elementary, they're paying the village income tax as well to support their roads and their parks and their services. So it is an investment in our community. And we won't be here without our staff to provide the education opportunities for our students. We saw all the benefits of it with our top-ranked pharmacy student and the freshmen that were up here. Just look around. That's where the money goes. When I get asked, where does our tax money goes? It goes into each and every child that walks through our doors. It goes into our graduates who go through our programs, who are now contributing to the workforce or the military or in college. It's an investment that continues to grow as our community grows as well, and people, they go get college, they get good jobs, they start families. That's where it goes. That's where we continue to do.
Mark, do you have any idea how the 58% would compare to other districts? Is that higher than most districts, lower, comparable?
I would say it's higher. Definitely higher.
Carla, do you know what
Carla says
Arlington
yes.
was?
I don't, but I would just, from like my building that I was a principal in, 58% would be much higher than what I was used to having, living in the community where the building was.
Okay.
So I don't know, Dr. Miller, if you have the same.
Not 58% in Southwestern.
Mark, can you go forward one slide for me, please? One more, right there. Can you explain to me, and I apologize, I probably should have given you a heads up on this question, and you don't necessarily have to answer it. It's just something to think about. So can you explain to me, if you look over the trajectory, right?
Mhm.
We've seen we've seen a ton of houses, of new homes
Yes.
go in and new businesses go in.
Right.
Why is our cash balances not going up dramatically to account for that?
Yeah, so that's a good
What are you doing with the money?
So that's a good question, first of all. So we have seen increase in property tax revenue due to new construction, 9% this past year, for instance, with the new developments coming onto their tax rolls, as well as the new commercial developments that are coming online. So what we have been doing is saving for the future. So we have a capital fund set aside that could be used for our roofing projects that we have on the agenda, our paving projects. We also need our water and sewer upgrades while we're here. So in these times, we need to start saving for the future. So that's coming off of our fund balance. But also, our expenditures are outpacing the increased revenues that we're seeing from property tax. So while the property tax revenues are increasing, it's not increasing as fast as our expenditures. So again, we were using this opportunity to, after 10 years of austerity, essentially, to get back to where we could be. We're elevating in every area, and that includes bringing on more staff to better serve our students. We also are trying to save for the future with our severance fund. So for retiring employees, when they retire, they know that we have money set aside for their benefits when they're ready to go. And also we can save for any unexpected costs. So
$220,000 to pave the parking lot,
yes,
$120,000 to fix the skylight in the high school,
yes.
One skyline?
one skylight.
Well, it's an
Well,
atrium.
the skylight
Well, the whole-
area.
Yeah,
the whole
just
skylight.
so our
That's-
community knows
Right.
what some of the expenses are, like to seal your driveway at home is $750 to pave our parking lot here, it's $220,000.
That's not the whole parking lot, that's just
That's
Right.
a
It's
section
the
of a
three
parking lot.
areas in the
And that
front.
was the lowest bid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the roofing project came in under budget, but it was 162.
Yes, it was.
So it's
So-
not just the everyday running of the school district.
Mm-hmm.
There's huge expenses that come up and sometimes haven't been dealt with in the past because the
Right.
money hasn't been there in the past,
Right.
so then it comes up now.
Yes.
So there is no way to really avoid having a savings without sending the school district at some level and at some point in time into disrepair. Because you have to spend big chunks, it's like living in a house,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden your water heater goes out.
Or-
You can't just leave it out.
Right.
What's a new bus cost?
172,000, 175,000, just for one bus. It was 100,000 when I first started my career as a treasurer.
And we need to purchase one or two every year to stay up to
Yeah.
speed.
Why?
Enrollment and the buses that, buses 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 that are over 10 years old, 15 years old.
Sorry, Bill. Sorry.
No,
It
it's
costs
just-
more to
I mean-
maintain those buses than it's worth.
We're asking these questions for the sake of everyone else that's listening that doesn't automatically understand and know these things. Just, yeah.
Yes.
So with the new houses that are going in,
Mhm.
why can't you use the property tax and the income tax from these expensive developments to pay?
No.
This is a serious question.
No,
Why
I know
can't-
why you're asking.
Why
I'm
can't you use the money that's coming in from them to build the schools? Why are we asking for a bond? Why don't you just use the money from the growth that's coming in to pay for the new buildings?
So, in order to pay for the building in cash, again, just cash, not borrowing, using just the revenue from new construction, it will take us about 70 years to save up for it.
How many?
70.
The
So
plan probably wouldn't work in 70 years.
No, so it'd be about 70 years, so that'd be 110. You know? By the time we have enough money to save up for it, that does not include inflation. You know, we have to keep that in mind too. And we also, if we're going to borrow, which will most prudent way of doing it, we do have to get voter approval to borrow that amount of funds because it will be over our debt limits. We can't just target certain developments
Why don't you just make the new developments pay the
Right.
bond?
because it goes against tax law. It is a uniform system of taxation. If you look at Article 12 of the Ohio Constitution, we can't just target certain developments for payment. It has to be a universal tax rate across all similar property. So that's why we can't just target them.
Why don't you make the developers pay for it?
I just don't think that would lead to any development. I don't know how they could possibly, they're in a profit motive, right? They're a profit-fronted business. If you're asking them to upfront pay for a $70 million building project, I don't see how they're making back their costs. They're not going to make that investment.
Great,
Could you
then we
make-
won't have any development.
Could you
But-
make them if
yeah.
you wanted to?
Yeah, but even if we wanted to, do we have
No.
authority to ask?
We don't.
Right.
I think you guys should credit Facebook, not portray these questions as your own.
Yeah, we don't
For
have the
attribution's
authority.
sake.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Well, they're
These
legitimate
are
questions.
legit. These are legitimate. These are
Concerns of the
legitimate
community.
questions.
All things we've heard.
Yes. I'm just busting your chops,
I
but I think
get
these are
it.
things that we should address.
Yeah.
And
Going
we will,
forward.
we will.
What's that?
We will address them.
Can you accept donations?
Sure.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Just one.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll gladly accept donations and help.
Even directed donations. We would take a donation for a building fund
Yeah.
Sure.
Or auditorium fund.
or an
Auditorium
auditorium.
Yeah.
Sure.
I just
Absolutely.
read that Bill Gates is giving up his entire wealth
Yeah.
system, so maybe
Wouldn't hurt to ask.
someone could get on his radar.
We'll write a letter.
Right.
So can I make a couple comments?
Yeah.
Mr. Ingalls, one, I want to thank you, and I wanted to emphasize to the board, things come to my office every day about can we purchase this, then I try to decipher whether it's wants or needs, and how does it impact our students. I go back to always the teaching and the learning department, because we have great ideas from our leaders, and I go back to Mr. Ingalls and say, how does this impact us? Does this bring enough value to make the purchase? And you can see with how he does his tracking, his spreadsheets, and can show me, yes, we can do it now, or not yet, or we make a determination that it doesn't bring the value. So there's that piece. Secondly, I wanted to just remind the board what an incredible position that we're in because of negotiations that took place in the fall. There are districts that are surrounding us right now because of the complication of what the state is doing, that there's turmoil between the teachers negotiating with the administrators. We feel like we reached a fair contract with our teachers, and we have that behind us, and we've built these relationships, and we can move on with that, and we don't have to spend our time, energy, and emotions through negotiations this spring. So that's another thing to think about, that we're such in a good position right now.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
great.
Thanks to the.
Mr. Engels, thank you very much for the report.
You did a great job.
Forecast.
Thank you, Mark, for
Of answering a bunch of questions that you weren't prepared for.
If there's any further questions, feel free to reach out to me, email or phone. The 5-year forecast, or someone else out of the room here.
Yeah,
5-year forecast document will be available online under the community section and the treasurer webpage. You can find a whole host of information, but I'm always happy to talk things through. So,
Thank you. Mr.
Thank you
Engels.
very much. Do we have a lot more public participation now that Mr. Engels has spoken?
Okay.
Excellent. Okay. I also just wanted to say, as a board, we really appreciate everything you're doing to try to explain both to us and to the legislature the upsides and the downsides. I think it's very, some of the stuff seems like a great idea, but when you start to parse it out and you put it, and you put it to test, there's a lot of unintended consequences. And really what you've been trying to communicate is the specific unintended consequences for our community, and to show them in the most basic way you possibly can. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. It's definitely is complicated issues, and I do think there's ways to accomplish their goals, but also not leave us out. I didn't even mention the fact that cash balance proposal, it only applies to public schools, so it's very apparent essentially what they're being that we're being targeted, and because we're not the only taxing jurisdiction here. There's fire departments, there's police levies, county levies. Plain City Village has a property tax levy. Counties, townships, they're not impacted by that whatsoever.
Nobody else is impacted by the 30%
Yes.
carryover.
Yes. So it's just public schools. So, granted, we see the majority of the funds, but we're not the only ones. So, again, it's something that we're in touch with, and got a meeting with Senator Reynolds next week. Looking forward to it. She's already heard from me before, and Senator Ryan Key is, according to his office, going to schedule a meeting with the county treasurers. I haven't heard back yet when that's happening.
Yeah, and thank you for letting me tag along to your meeting
Yeah.
with Senator Reynolds too. I think the more that they see people, the faces of people from the communities, and learn, the better chance we have of getting something that is actually workable.
Yeah.